So that did work in that I can see myself now. The only problem is I kicked you all off. Anyway, my apologies for that. You can hopefully join back on now because I can see myself, and also I can see the messages. So, Khair, hopefully you'll jump off that live and jump on this one. Let me give you 10 seconds or so. Whilst you're jumping on, as I mentioned to you, the theme for today is on leadership lessons from Islam. And as I have habit, what I always do is I always discuss the sort of framework that we need to build first before we then discuss our particular topic. So around the time of the Prophet ﷺ, we find that there were various types of leaderships. You know, we had the Negus type of leadership within Abyssinia. We had the kind of feudal leadership that existed within the Arab tribes. We had a leadership which existed amongst the Persians, and we also had a leadership which existed amongst the Romans. Okay, so we had these various types of leaderships that existed, and the leaderships were brought about based on different structures. Sometimes based on the fact that it was a tribal setup. So if you were the tribal elder, then you were given the leadership. Sometimes it was based on tyranny, a bit like the pharaohs. They were very much tyrannical. They had to set themselves up as infallible. They had to set themselves up virtually as gods in order to have the people accept them as a leader. Others that usually were via family. So, for example, which you get with the particularly which you get amongst the Persians, but again, that was very tyrannical. I guess King Negus in Abyssinia was quite unique in that he was a Christian, and therefore there was justice and fairness amongst his court and amongst his society. When the Prophet ﷺ arrives and makes his declaration of faith, we don't find out, obviously, his kind of leadership skills as an absolute leader until he arrives in Medina. The only problem is when I did that, I kicked everybody off. That was the downside. So I don't know where they're all stuck now. They might still be stuck on the other thing. I didn't know that by pressing reset, I would kick everybody off and it would go disappear. But hey, it's happened now. Otherwise, I would have just kept it on as long as you could see me. That was the main thing anyway. But you know, it is what it is. Let's move on. So when the Prophet ﷺ had kind of authority, there are certain things which he shows, which we can take lessons from. So in the early period in Mecca, we see, for example, the Prophet ﷺ is very principled. Okay, you see a very principled approach. He is approached by many from the Quraysh, and they offer him all sorts. They make threats to him. They also offer him kingdom. They offer him authority, power. They try to ridicule him. So he shows determination. So one is he's principled. Secondly, he shows determination in what he needs to achieve. And thirdly, he builds a small group of people around him who are like-minded. So again, very important as when you're starting off on a project and you're developing sort of a team around you, is to get like-minded people around you. So we see, for example, Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu, others joining the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, yani some that were considered as the poor, below poverty, they were joining. But also he tried his utmost to try to win over influential people. So that shows another aspect of leadership, is that whatever it is that you're delivering, whatever it is that you're running, it is key to try to get some influential people as part of your team as well, because that influence will play a big part. Also, obviously, these people bring their own authority. So having authority figures supporting what you're doing also builds to that. Once we see the Prophet ﷺ move to Medina, then you start to see him approach in a unique way, in that he brings parties together that don't necessarily agree with one another. For example, the Jewish tribes that had existed in Medina, they didn't really agree with the Prophet ﷺ. However, the offer that he was making, as now that he's come as the leader between the two big Arab tribes of the Aus and Khazraj, and he becomes their leader and by extension the leader of Medina, it made sense, obviously, for the Jewish tribes not to kick up too much fuss, as amongst the Arab munafiqun that were also in Medina as well, for them to make too much of a fuss, because he was winning people over. And he was winning people over because of his charisma. He was winning people over because of his fairness and honesty, and also because he was very keen in not making enemies. Apart from obviously the enemies that would be naturally made, where people started to make lines in the sand. We saw that in particular in Mecca, and it was those people who had something to lose. They started to make lines in the sand, and therefore they were quite clearly opposed to the Prophet ﷺ. But whenever he would get the opportunity, he made sure, especially after Fath Mecca, that those individuals who had stood against him for over a decade, that he gave them an opportunity in order to come into the fold of Islam. He did not at that time be vengeful. He wasn't at that time. So this shows again another skill, another leadership skill, which is at the time when you're proven to be right, that's not the time now to kind of go for the jugular and destroy those who stood against you, but rather bring them into the fold of the project that you're doing. So it could be something that you're working on as a project in the community, or as a project at work, or something like that. And you find that you've got a group of people who are disagreeing with one another. And here's one way where you can bring those parties together once you've proven your method is working. So that shows, alhamdulillah, that, through, and I wanted to keep this relatively short, that through his time, both in Mecca and Medina, and then we saw, obviously, as he moved on, and the tribes in the Arabian Peninsula pretty much had accepted Islam. Obviously, we know then saying that Abu Bakr had to deal with all the Ridda, all those people who had renegaded and either left Islam completely and openly or refused to give zakah. We saw then saying Abu Bakr had to reaffirm that grip of Islam on the Arabian Peninsula, and as a way made sure that he was had to kind of re-engage with these tribes and to into the fold as well. So I just wanted to kind of share those few minutes about the various leadership. I mean, really, I've only kept it very brief. Reason why I've kept it very brief, because obviously not all of us are in positions of leadership. And because we're not all in positions of leadership, then that might be something interesting for those of us who are in positions of leadership. But for those who aren't, it will be something a little bit kind of outside the norm. But we're all on a basic personal level leaders. Either we're going to be fathers or we're going to be mothers. So therefore, we're going to be leaders of our own families. And those who are slightly senior might also be leaders of their extended family, i.e. siblings, cousins, and things like that. So therefore, even though we may not be in a communal leadership role that we have, or in our place of work, we do all play some role as a leader. And therefore, if we can assess through the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, the way he engaged with people, is referred to as a servant leader meaning somebody who serves his team. He's not one who's at the front cracking the whip and telling people to do something that he's not willing to do himself, but he's actually in amongst the people, as we saw, for example, at the digging of the Khandaq, or the building of Masjid Nabwi, or various other events that took place where the Prophet ﷺ did not exclude himself from his companions, but actually partook in the role with them. So this type of novel leadership, which was unheard of times gone by, where the elite would never mix in with the rest of the folk. They would separate themselves and consider themselves better to be doing this kind of manual work. The Prophet ﷺ was always hands-on and did not shy away from that. And we also, again, whilst I talk about the Khandaq, many of the companions, obviously due to excessive hunger, had tied stones to their stomachs. And eventually they sort of plucked up the courage to say, let's just go speak to the Prophet and explain to him, the state of our affairs. And they were about to approach him. But when he is breaking this huge rock in the Khandak and they see that he's got 2 stones tied to his stomach, then they said, how can we go to the Prophet and raise our concerns and slightly make a complaint to him when he's in a worse situation than we are? So he led from the front in the sense of responsibility. But when it came to rights, he was always in amongst his companions. He did not want to differentiate himself from anybody else. He did not feel that he should be given preferential treatment in any way, shape, or form. He felt that he was as needy of forgiveness, as needy of Allah's salvation as anybody else was. And this shows obviously his humility and his humbleness, which again are key leadership characteristics, is to always express humility, always express humbleness. Don't let the position that you are in get to your head, that if somebody puts you in charge of a madrasa or someone puts you in charge of a project, or you have leadership over your family, that don't use this now to your advantage in any way, shape, or form. Are you providing some benefit to the community that you've been put in charge of, or is this all the benefit coming to you? Is this selfish or selfless? These are key things that we can look out with. So let's just jump on to some questions that have come in already. Can you please explain who the hypocrites were during the time of the Prophet, and what characteristics or actions distinguish them as hypocrites from the sincere believers, and how to avoid becoming hypocritical? Well, in quite simply, Iman, is if your actions aren't according to your beliefs, then that's the sign of hypocrisy. Okay. So if your actions aren't according to your beliefs, then that's a sign of a hypocrisy. So if a person believes in Islam and accepts all the tenets of Islam, but does not practice it, then obviously there's something not right here. Because if you believe in Allah and you believe in his book as a revealed text, then all the ahkam, the rules and regulations that are found in his text, or as if we believe in the Prophet ﷺ being sent from Allah, and all the statements, all the ahkam within his statements, then readily we must act upon them. If we don't act upon them, then the question comes up, why? Why aren't we acting upon those instructions on a book that we believe came from God, on a book that we believe came from Allah? And why aren't we acting on those instructions coming from a man that we believe is a prophet? Now, that shows obviously something is not absolutely wired up properly if we aren't bringing things into practice. So that's a sign. It's sometimes referred to as nifaqul a'mal, the hypocrisy of actions. In terms of hypocrisy in belief, it would be that a person when we talk about the ones in Medina, is they actually were quite sure that they did not believe in the Prophet ﷺ, and they just gave a superficial practice of so as not to be seen, so as not to be found out, so as not to be targeted potentially by the companions. So therefore they gave the impression that, oh, we are like you. How would that take place, say, in the present day and age? It would be for most of us who are born in Muslim houses. And as we go through life and as we become adults, we actually choose another life. Our belief system is different. The way we want to live is different. But what we do is we want to not kind of rock the boat. We don't want mom and dad to find out that actually we don't really believe in these things. Okay, we don't want our mates that we grew up with finding out that we don't really believe in these things. We don't want people on our street finding out, because we still live within the community, that we don't really believe in these. So we just fit in. Okay, we don't really question things. We don't try to assess things. We don't try to analyze things. We don't try to have any. We don't tend to have any sort of fickle on those sorts of things. All we do is we just kind of go with the flow. We just keep our head below the parapet, hoping that nobody will ask us any questions, but we don't want to come out and make a statement and sort of say, well, actually, I don't believe in this or I don't believe in that. So that's the only hypocrisy that could potentially exist in this day and age. Is someone who is struggling to practice the deen, such as prayers, also a hypocrite then? The thing is, when people say struggling to practice the deen, there's nothing that will cause a person to struggle to practice deen. Because let's unpack that. What does that mean? A person struggles to practice deen. Is it a physical inability to stand on the prayer mat, to make wudu? Of course, everybody will say, no, it's not a physical inability. Of course, a person can stand up and pray salah and go and do ruku and do sajda. So it's not that. Okay, so what is it? It's this person is in doubt. It's got nothing to do with, I hear this phrase, you mentioned this, Iman, where people say, I'm struggling to practice my deen. No one struggles to practice their deen. Praying salah is really simple. It takes 5 minutes and it's not that strenuous. And so it's a really simple thing to do. Fasting is quite challenging. Well, even fasting is not too bad. Hajj is quite challenging, but even Hajj is not too bad. Giving 2.5% of your savings is not very challenging. So practicing Islam is not difficult. What people struggle with is doubt. That's what they're struggling with. They aren't fully convinced. They just haven't unpacked this. They've not just really come to terms with this. That, do I really believe? If anybody really believed that if they die and they don't pray salah, they're going to go to hell, they would pray. There's no doubt about that. You would never place your hand on a stove which is hot. You would never place your hand on a burning fire. Why not? Nobody would say, oh, but nobody would do that. Why? And we know by our lifestyles that we do everything it takes to avoid getting into difficulty. So we'll go to college, we'll go to uni, we'll do well at school, we'll try to get a job which is well paid. So we're doing everything within our power to make sure that we've got a roof over our head, to make sure that we've got food on the table, to make sure we've got clothes on our back. And we would do nothing which would bring that into any level of inability to perform. So that shows, what are we doing there? So that shows we clearly have ability. So the only struggling element it's not even struggling. And I think this is something that we hide behind. In essence, we have doubt, raib. That's what this is referred to. We have doubt. We don't have iman, and we most definitely don't have yaqeen. Yaqeen is the highest form. Okay, so when you saw, for example, in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, nobody struggled to practice the deen. They did struggle with doubt. There's no doubt about that. But they didn't struggle to practice the deen. As I told you, hypocrites would pray salah. People who openly said, I do not believe this man is a prophet. I do not believe this is a religion, but I don't want to draw any attention to myself, so I'm going to go to the masjid and I'm going to pray. So people did that in Medina, so as not to draw attention to themselves. Even knowingly, even in their hearts, they did not believe that this man was a prophet, and they did not believe that this was a revealed text, and they did not believe in anything, but they did it. They did not struggle. So this is not an element of physical struggling. If I was to say to you, let's just use you, Iman, as an example. If I was to say to you, right, what I want you to do, Iman, is whilst I'm on this lecture, I want you to now stand up and just pray 4 rakats. Off you go. Now, what would you say? Oh, I'm struggling to do that. I'd say, why? What's the matter? I can't stand up, or I can't sit down. Of course you wouldn't. The only struggling would be is that I don't think I should do this. Think. That's the key word. And we would say, why don't you think you should do this? Because clearly this person, whoever this person is, has not built their iman. So this is not an issue of struggling to practice deen. This is an issue of a person's iman. How is it that a person's iman ends up in this state? Is because he has not studied enough or engaged enough, or unfortunately Allah SWT has not opened his heart enough in order to accept iman into his heart. That's what this is. So he has to make sure that he maintains his ritual acts, because it's the ritual acts that will lead to iman. If you're on one of our channels, you'll see a recent short, and I think it's probably on here as well, which talks about the difference between Islam and iman. And the Islam is to perform one's ritual acts. So you just perform them like a robot. You don't start questioning, yeah, but do I really believe? Do I don't really believe? No, I got to do this. We go to work for 8 hours a day. Do we really say, do I really fancy working today? Don't really fancy working today. Soon as you know your bills aren't going to get paid, soon as you know your mortgage is not going to get paid, soon as you know you're not going to get the next promotion, we're there half an hour before the office opens. We're there half an hour later. So there's no then, oh, should not do this? That's really because our motivations, unfortunately, aren't at the moment to please Allah. Our motivations at the moment, and that could be due to our upbringing, that could be due to so many factors, as to why we're in a situation where our faith is not important to us. Okay, but good question. Please do put some more on. I'm just going to have a quick check on the Telegram group to see if there was anything that came here. So yeah, we've got this long question. Assalamu alaikum. Regarding the rank, please confirm that the following is correct belief. Our prophet is the best of creation, then Ibrahim, then Musa, then Isa, and then Nuh, then the rest of the messengers, then the non-messenger prophets, then Jibril, then Israfil, then Mikael, then Israel, and then the normal human beings, and then the mass of the angels. Where have we gone? Mass of the angels. Where did it go? Where did it go? There we go. Then Ulul Azam prophets, are they better than the rest? I don't think we should be too preoccupied in things of this nature. Okay, it does not benefit in any way, shape, or form. We're better learning ilm which we're going to put into practice. So I'm not even going to entertain an answer for that. Can one pray on uneven ground? Yes, as long as there is as long as it does not, when you go into sajda, you don't fall over. There's nothing wrong in praying in uneven ground. Nothing at all. Is there any Islamic basis for girls, women pretending to fast whilst they're not required to fast in Ramadan? Or is this practice cultural? Is there any Islamic basis for girls, women pretending to fast whilst they're not required to fast in Ramadan? I see. The thing is that when a woman is fasting and her menstrual cycle starts while she's fasting, so suhoor, let's just say, is at 4 a.m. and she is on her menstruals, she started her fast. Okay, so suhoor is at 4 a.m. She started her fast, and so she's not eating. It gets to noon, 12 o'clock, and her menstrual cycle starts. Okay, her menstrual cycle starts at noon. Okay, so now what does she do? So what she should do is she has to break her fast. Okay, because the menstrual cycle has broken her fast, but she has to break her fast by eating food, and she should eat food through the day. Okay, why? Because it is haram upon her to fast, so she has to eat. Now she may not eat in front of maybe there's nothing there. I don't know, sometimes we get this kind of over she may choose not to eat in front of her father, for example, just because she might feel a little bit embarrassed to eat in front of her father, say that my father's going to think, oh, why are you eating for? And remember, not all the men folk, especially the unmarried men, she may have sons who don't really know the mas'ala. If they've not studied or anything, they may not know about the menstrual cycles of women not fasting and all the rest of it. So they may think, why is mom eating for? What's that all about? Why is she not fasting? Similarly, young girls may not know. So if a mother's eating in front of a 6-year-old, then that 6-year-old might think, oh, why is mom eating for? So she might choose not to eat publicly. So that's one. The second one is that if, for instance, she is already on her menstrual cycle, okay, she's already on a menstrual cycle. So suhoor time comes, she's already on a menstrual cycle, so she can't fast. It's day 5. And she knows it normally her menstrual cycle lasts for 5.5 days. It gets to now noon. It gets to noon and her menstrual cycle stops. So she makes ghusl. Now she should from eating. She should refrain from eating because technically she is now pure. So she should fast. The only reason she fast properly is because she missed the 7 hours, 8 hours beforehand. But otherwise, she's going to cut. So that's the point where she will not eat food. So it's not that she's pretending to fast. All she's doing is she's not eating because the mas'ala now half applies to her in that she's in a pure state and it is a day in Ramadan. However, her fast is obviously not done because she was impure for the 7 hours of the fast previously. So the fast is not done, but she will imitate in that way. Hope that makes sense. If not, please do type. How would one know if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with them? And how would they know if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is angry with them? This is all about ilm. Okay? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his Prophet alayhi salatu have not left us in the dark. They've not left us in the dark. We always get these kind of questions, and about, how do I know if I'm guided? How do I know if I'm not guided? How do I know if Allah's pleased with me? Whatever. And these are good questions to have, because people do think them, but sometimes they don't ask them. So if when you speak to the ulama and you tell the ulama what it is you're doing, that I do this, then that person will say, Alhamdulillah, you know, uh, on the face of it, you're doing things which pleases Allah. But also, if you mention, yeah, and I do this, then they'll say, okay, so you're doing plenty that pleases Allah. We're also doing a bit stuff which is displeasing to Allah. So you're kind of like 60% pleasing and 40% displeasing. So you're still ahead at the end of the day. You're up 20%, but it's a bit risky. So why don't you try to stop some of these things? Because if you stop some of these things, then you're going to be more 70-30 or 80-20. So that's how you know. We're not left in the dark. There's clearly things which Allah said that makes him angry, and there's clearly things which please Allah. So we know about them. If one prays in the wrong direction, are they required to repeat the salah? No, if they did tahari, yani they reached a place in which they did not know which direction Qibla was, and they applied their own reasoning and applied as much as they could do by looking at the sun, or kind of roughly working out the direction, and they prayed in that direction, then the salah is valid, even if somebody afterwards tells them, oh, which way did you pray then? Oh, I prayed in that direction. Oh, you shouldn't have prayed in that direction. You should have prayed in that direction. Qibla is that way. You don't say, oh, goodness me, I better go repeat it. It doesn't matter. However, if you're praying and somebody walks in and says, oh, that's not Qibla, sister, that's the Qibla, then you would turn whilst you are in salah. Okay? I hope that makes sense. So if there's any more, please do ask away. Just going to see if there's anything on the chaps. Helps if you actually go on the chaps group. I've gone on something completely different. Okay. Been a long day. No, alhamdulillah, that's all done there. Brilliant. So let's see if they give about 30 seconds to see if any more questions comes up on the YouTube. Whilst we're waiting for those questions to come up, let me give you the theme for All Being Well tomorrow. But if not, the next days, whenever there is. So the next Fiqh Hour, we're going to talk about healthy living in body, mind, and spirit. Okay, what is it about health being healthy? How do we as Muslims define healthy? Do we limit healthy just to our physical attributes? Or do we say healthy goes beyond just the body, and healthy also applies to the mind and to the spirit, the soul? Why is it that as Muslims we don't take our physical health seriously enough? Why is it that we find that when it comes to dental hygiene we're in a bad place? When it comes to heart, cardiovascular diseases, we're in a bad place. When it comes to eating excessively and then as a consequence getting diabetes and things of that nature, we're in a bad place. Why is it as Muslims our kind of food consumption is slightly mismatched with who we're supposed to be? So that's the next theme, healthy living in body, mind, and spirit, inshallah. And all being well, that will be tomorrow, assuming we still keep with our schedule, which we're doing pretty well at the moment, alhamdulillah. So last 30 seconds, anything that's coming up on the YouTube and on Instagram and Facebook with regards to any questions before we bring down the shutter for today, inshallah. Also been discussing with Eternal Gardens that I do some work with. We'll be visiting them in London. I think they're in Sidcup on the 26th or 27th of April, inshallah. And we finalized my visit down to Walthamstow, Masjid Umar, on Queen's Road in Walthamstow for my i'tikaf, inshallah. That's planned for a Sunday drive down. That's going to be enjoyable, 4 hours without eating or drinking. It's a drinking, I guess, more than anything else. I always prefer to sip on a coffee, not sit on a coffee. I said sip on a coffee. It's not good to sit on a coffee no matter where you're going. I wouldn't mind. I like sipping on a coffee, as the saying goes. When I'm driving, it kind of keeps me alert, keeps me awake, which is always useful when you're driving, is to be awake. But fasting 4 hours, alhamdulillah, that's going to be fun. And but chalo, it is what it is, inshallah. I didn't go last year because my mother was ill, and then Allah bless her, she passed away 2 weeks or so after Ramadan. So I'm going after a couple of years. I do go regularly, alhamdulillah. So it'll be good to see the community down in Walthamstow. Okay, so it seems as though everybody's appetite in the sense of questions and answers is complete. So I'll ask your permission to leave and give you time to pray your Taraweeh as well, as I will pray mine, inshallah. Continue to remember us all in your du'as. And as I've said previously, please do share the handles, the links, and everything else with it. There was something else I was doing today. I did a podcast with Dr. Awal Fuseli along on halal food. So he works close to the government on halal food, and we were looking at the Muslim way of slaughter, whatever. So if you're on our channels and on our WhatsApps and Telegrams, there will be a link probably posted the next day or two, so you can watch that as well, inshallah. Jazakum khairan wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Tomorrow, assume